G'day, this is Eric Perez from Talking Leadership, welcoming you back to our ongoing podcast series. And today I'm joined by a friend that I've known in the industry and a mentor to many in my industry over the past 8 years that I've known her, and probably longer than that with the ag sector. She is the Managing Director and founder of Affectus. Can I say hello to Jill Briggs? How are you, Jill?
Yeah, I'm great, Eric. How are you?
Good. Thank you for joining me. So I will put up front for the listeners that my professional dealings with Jill started eight years ago, as I am proudly one of the many 2011 graduates of the National Seafood Industry Leadership Program, and I learnt a lot about what it is to engage with this leadership issue 8 years ago, and it's a little trippy for me now, 8 years on, to have the person who was running the course now a very welcome guest on the podcast. So that's my opening there, and for those that haven't had the chance to experience the program or are in the ag sector, please contact Affectus and Jill and her team. Particularly good at unpacking what the leadership issue means for those in the ag sector. And I can only say, from the strength of the program in the seafood industry and the amount of support that it gets across the country, that it's worth picking up the phone and getting in contact with Jill. And I'll make those details available on the podcast right up when it gets published. So, look, I've had enough talking on this end. So welcome, Jill, and how are you, mate?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm really looking forward to this. Can't tell you how much I'm looking forward to it. I even spent some time this afternoon writing some notes. So I'm really, really looking forward to chatting with you.
Excellent. So I'll start where all of my great podcasts have started, with the question: when was your first leadership role? Where was your first leadership role, and why did you take it on, Jill?
Oh wow, Eric. Way back when I was in grade 6, I was elected the vice captain of my reasonably large primary school, and that was a real. I don't remember it, vividly, but I do remember the excitement of getting that gig. My friend and I, she became the captain and I was the vice captain. We did quite a lot of work to get those gigs. It wasn't sort of just like they fell out of the sky. We needed to talk to our peers, and the grade 6 were the people who elected us. So that was my first, at the ripe old age of 12. I got that gig, and it was a really interesting experience because I went from just thinking it was a popularity contest to understanding that there were roles and responsibilities and a certain expectation about holding that role and having that pin on my uniform every day.
So, Jill, you're not the first to mention having that a school-based experience in the leadership space, and from I guess as you can't speak for the education system, but did you find that those opportunities were there when you went to high school as well? Did you seek them out, or were they sort of given to you by the school as an identified, perhaps, leader in the school?
So my sense was that I got the vice captain job to keep me out of trouble, because I was a bit of a troublemaker. And it was one of those, looking back on it, was one of those, keep your friends close and your enemies closer. Like, I really think the school thought this young girl could be a real troublemaker if we don't give her some sense of what it's like to be a responsible leader. And then when I moved from primary school to secondary school, I was a bit of a rebel. I was a bit of a naughty girl. So I got my kudos of being a leader by being a bit of a middle finger sort of a person. That hasn't really changed much. And then when I moved to my second secondary school, when my parents knew that I was completely, I was not going to change, they packed me off to boarding school. And then a whole heap of new opportunities opened up. But they were definitely, you had to look for them and you needed to show your varying abilities, not just those standard, you know, she's the loudest, she's the brightest, she's the fastest, she's the cleverest. The school wasn't only interested in helping people find their leadership capacity through those traditional norms that society thought or still may think demonstrated leadership. So I moved from that, the loudest, the naughtiest, the fastest, the most brightest model into this model of, you know, how can we grow these individuals and how can we let them experience leadership differently at my second school. Yeah.
So thank you for sharing that. So what was the transition out of the school system and out of high school into, you know, the real world of work? So what was your first role in that sense?
Yeah. So Eric, I did. I went from primary school to secondary school to university, and I came out with a Bachelor of Education, secondary, with environmental science and geomorphology as my two majors. And I thought to myself, if I'm going to if I'm going to be a teacher, if I'm going to be any sort of teacher, if I'm going to be able to lead in that space as a young teacher, then to go from one educational institute to another and then straight back into it was not going to give me the life experience I needed to be a good leader in the educational space. So I went and made short blacks and cut sandwiches for a year in Collins Street, in Melbourne, which was between one of the most expensive retail outlets in Australia and a really grungy building site. So that was a huge experience for me to be working across these two cultural spaces in Australia's, I don't know, culture, society. And I learned a lot in that experience. And then when I moved into my first paid role, I saw the world really differently through that 1 year of experience of cutting sandwiches and making short blacks. And that experience taught me that everybody's valuable, that everybody's got an ability to lead no matter what space they're in. And the thing that I took into my teaching was make the space for young people to find where they want to step into. And that was because I was working with fluoro-vested guys and women who sold Chanel number 19. Like every day, they were the two groups that I was dealing with. And it just made me appreciate people at a really different level.
Thank you for sharing that. So I'd like to move into that space of asking, in your travels as a leader, and I guess I can extend that to your time in your role running your business. What do you see as a distinction between management and leadership?
So, Eric, firstly, I want to say I've heard you ask this question of a few of the people you've interviewed.
Sure.
And I think the lines get blurred around those two words. But I believe that management is about getting a job done. And I think fundamentally, management is about getting the job done by helping people understand what their tasks are. And I think that leadership is motivating people to change direction and find a new place that they would prefer to be in, and motivating people to go to that place, not necessarily to follow you. I don't believe in that whole follow leadership myth. I think it is. I think leadership is more about, my role is more about helping people find where do they want to be, and then saying to them, well, how are you going to get them, and giving them some scaffolding to help them find that place and then to go there and to be courageous about it.
Yeah, thank you. That response is, I knew it wasn't going to be the same as the responses I've had in previous podcasts, but there are so many different views as to the function of management or managers and leadership in organizations, and I can't even say that I'm a fence sitter. I still see some overlap between the two, and then some very, very clear distinctions between those that have a leader function and those that have a managerial function. And I will put my hand up and say maybe this is old leader thinking, but I still believe that those in the managerial space, their core function, whatever the organization is, whether it's for profit or not for profit, is an operational getting the job done versus the leadership role, which can be things like looking at, 1 day, 1 minute, 3 years, 5 years into the future, and trying to understand where could we be at a certain point in time, as opposed to what do I need to do on a daily. Not that that's not.
Totally agree.
That's not that that's not important.
No, definitely, they're both really important. And the other thing about that is that we can do both. It's just that we have to think differently. So when we're thinking management, we have to think one way. And when we're thinking leadership, we have to think another way. And I think many people can do both, but you have to make a conscious decision. Am I doing a management role here, or am I inspiring people to take on new leadership positions for themselves? And they're quite different ways of thinking. And I think some people can do both. I think some people think they're doing both and they're not.
Yeah.
And then I see people switch, and I consciously make switches between getting the job done and actually thinking about how can I inspire the people around me to face differently and to see differently and go off and do things differently. Yeah.
So let me add, or not add, change the question a little bit for you to see what you think on this. Can you be a good leader without ever having had managerial experience?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, of course. Yeah, definitely. Definitely, because Eric, and it probably takes back to the theme of one of the themes that I'd love to explore with you is that concept of, are leaders born or are they made? And so for me, that whole concept of, do you need to have management skill to be able to move into the leadership space? Well, absolutely not, because my experience and my life experience, my personal life experience firstly, but also working with the people around me, there are people who've got, zero. Like they've left when they were 18 from an educational perspective, and they've moved into various different parts of their lives and they demonstrate leaders. And then there are people who are in management roles who haven't got any idea about how to work with people and get things happening. So I think that whole concept of, do you have to be a manager or holding down a management role to show leadership, is undervaluing what many people do day in, day out in that informal leadership space where they choose to be courageous and do something different to what they've been doing earlier to make a difference in the world around them. And I don't think that takes any management knowledge. I think that takes awareness and a desire to see a different way of the world or the different way of the space that they're in at that time. I certainly don't think that requires any sort of management knowledge at all.
Okay, no, I find myself agreeing with that, and I'm sure there'll be alternate views from those that are listening to the, and that's fine. So one of the things that I've tried to discuss with my interview guests offline, and happy to have the chat now, is that there is no right or wrong to this. I guess it's what's your lived experience of it, and some people will be wrestling with this in a later career context. I've been inspired by the emerging leaders that I've been speaking to. When I say inspired, I'm in my mid-40s now, and I'm talking to people in their early 20s. I'm starting to realise just how long in the tooth I am, and it's a little bit it's a little bit scary because there's some of my thinking around this has been challenged to the degree that I have changed my mind on a few things just because until you have the conversation or until you get a forum to talk about some of this stuff, it's really not something that comes to front of mind. And one stat that really blew me away, and I've shared this on a previous podcast, was that the industry around training and leader development globally is a $366 billion industry. Now, if organizations are prepared to spend that kind of money, then these discussions need to be had, or at least those that are making decisions would do well to listen, not to me, because the podcasts aren't about my experience, but listen to people like yourself and others to ask the question, well, are we doing the right things around our leaders, and how do we identify those diamonds in the rough that could be an organisation that aren't actively seeking leadership roles, that might give it a go if they were given the environment to do it. So, look, I'm particularly curious to ask you the next question, and I'm sure it's going to be a colourful answer.
I'll try not to swear.
No, yeah, if we can keep it PG, that'd be good. People make mistakes and leaders make mistakes. So can I ask from in your travels, how do you own a mistake that's been attributed to your leadership, Jill?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, this is a pointy one, isn't it? How can you... So I think that goes to vulnerability and being willing to say, I've done the wrong thing. And there are times in my life where I know I haven't fessed up to doing the wrong thing. And I look back on those times and there's no way to fix it up. But I know that I've learnt from those experiences. So personally, in my life, when I've made mistakes, when I've been holding a leadership role, I always need to think back. I need to look back and go, how? How did that happen? And for me, the how, like in my life, of all of those really big mistakes I've made, the how has been because I haven't got a team around me. So the how did that happen is because for a short or a more extended period of time, I haven't been nurturing the team around me. And so I've been off doing my own thing, thinking that I've got this group of people who've got my back or who are watching me. And in fact, that isn't what the reality is. The reality is that I've charged off, I haven't brought people with me, and then I've made a mistake and I look back and I go, oh gosh, there is no one else around me. And if I had have had other people around me, then they might have said to me, whoa up, you're about to fall over here. So that's one of the things for me at a personal level. I know that when I make mistakes, the pattern has often been that I've been out there charging away and I haven't brought people with me carefully enough. And then when I see other people make mistakes, the thing that always makes me feel most comforted is when they own it straight away. And a little bit of reading that I've done over the last couple of years is the power of the leader showing that they are a human being and what it does to everybody else around them. That if you make a mistake and you say, oh, I'm not perfect, then it gives everybody else around you the opportunity. Some of them won't take it up, but the opportunity to risk greater, because they know that if they fall over, then they just have to say, oh gosh, I made a mistake there, and it'll be okay. Like if they make a stupid mistake, that's different. But if they make a mistake because they're having a red hot go and they've seen that when you have a red hot go and you make a mistake and you fess up to it, that it's okay, then I think that's hugely powerful. And I see people, like great people, doing this all the time. And then you see what happens next, and it is magic. It's magic, because other people then have the courage to have a red hot go at something.
Yeah, that's exactly what you've said there has come up, particularly in some of the podcasts I've recorded recently, where the discussion is very much centered around the minute or the time at which you can say, hey, look, I'm not perfect and I made a mistake and it's my fault. It sends even it's a non-verbal cue to those in your team to go, oh shit, well, if the boss is prepared to say, hey, things can happen and we just need to deal with it, then I'm prepared to do the things. And it humanizes the person in that leadership role. Not and again, these are one of those assumptions that I had tested myself, because I just assumed when people took leadership roles on, others around them would just assume that it's just another person. But I think title can sometimes put people off. So if you work in a large corporate and the CEO is in the CEO's office, then it creates a little bit of a barrier to say, hey, when you're in here, this is the CEO, as opposed to, hey, when you're in here, this is Brad or Jennifer or whoever it is that's in there. Just an ability to have that chat becomes restricted because of the title that they wear, not necessarily the type of leader that they are. Okay, that's that, and thank you for sharing that response, because it's consistent with what I've been hearing. But even if it wasn't, at least there's something to this around being able to own your mistakes, and that can take a degree of letting the ego go a little bit, because nobody likes to admit that they've done something wrong. But the quicker you do it, I think the quicker it gets resolved.
Well, the other part of it is, Eric, is that, you know, when people admit to make a mistake and they make it a public, that they've made a mistake, then what our part of our brain, I don't know whether it's our bringing up, but part of our brain suggests that if we do that, then nobody's going to trust us. But in fact, all it does is it builds trust, because people don't then think, oh, gosh, something like he's hidden that or she's hidden that. I might get tripped up by something else that they've hidden. Whereas if people are open about, gosh, you know, I've just made a bit of the balls up there, then, or I forgot this or whatever it is, then it allows people to trust you more. Whereas part of our brain says, oh no, they're going to trust me less, but that's not what happens. People trust you more. And it also allows you to be, in my life, when I trip up, so a classic example of this the other day, Eric, was that our team was in Sydney doing some work and my admin person was away, and she is detail central, my Virginia, and she was off on her annual leave, and non-details Jill decides to book our flights to and from Sydney for all of the team. And one of the team, when I booked her flight, I booked it for a day later than what she wanted it. And it wasn't until she tried to check in and get a seat that she realised that I'd booked it for the Friday, not the Thursday. And I didn't even I'm so low on detail. And all it did was make us realise that we have to be a better team about this, and don't ever let Jill book the flights.
Yeah.
And so that trust of me being able to say, once again, I know this is not my area, and that's why we've got Virginia and Heidi in the team, because they're really good at that stuff as well as other stuff. It was just that sense of, oh yeah, we all need to play in this space. And when Jill suggests she's going to do something like that from now on, we're going to tell her to bugger off, because she's no good at that stuff. But that sense of trust in the team and being able to rely on one another, and it's just gold. It's just gold.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. So Jill, and not to drag this into a negative space, but I need to ask the following question. So in terms of your travels, what have you found not others you've trained but yourself, is the hardest part of leadership?
Okay, so that's a really good question. the hardest part of leadership, I think, for me personally, is knowing that there is a whole heap of unknown unknowns out there, and that it takes, for me, it takes me some courage to say, I don't know. And particularly if something really like, gosh, where's that come from? Sometimes I can feel myself pretending that I do know, and then I have to just know that that's a ridiculous place to go, and just know that there's a whole heap of unknown unknowns, and I don't know about that, and that's okay. And I think, Eric, there's something in there for women around that as well, is that it's to look like we don't know can sometimes, historically, it may make us look like we're not worthy. And so there's some of that, historical voice that I have to shush, that actually everybody doesn't know everything. But I think that's a real vulnerable spot for me, is the unknown and thinking that I should know stuff when actually, how could I possibly know everything? Yeah.
Yeah, that's to be fair, I think you might be treating yourself a little bit harshly there. I think for men in industry, blokes, and I'll speak for my gender on this one. I think it's the same deal. That
do you really? Yeah, okay.
You don't want to be tripped up, but by the same token, I think it's a lot more productive, say in a meeting, to say, if the topic's brought up that you have no expertise in, tell them what you think you know, and the limits of what you know, because then that sets the conversation around, well, okay, we've got someone in the room that may not know all the details, but if you're prepared to do something about that, then great. But going in and pretending you know something only sets yourself up for further problems.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. And all of my life, I'm constantly, reminding myself, you cannot know all of this stuff. What you do know is valid. You can't know everything, but sometimes I can hear this little voice just in my head saying, pretend you know. Like, shush, of course I don't know. But it is this sense of it's possibly a bit of imposter syndrome too, playing a little bit of a game there.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
So let's move into a more positive space. So, in terms of again your leadership travels, what do you see as the most positive aspects of being a leader? So that, and this is the first time I've asked this, because in most of the podcast series, those positive things come up in other questions that I've asked, but this time I'm going to add this to my list of questions. Is, so you've given me a potential negative. So what's the most positive thing about leadership in your travels, Jill?
Okay, so I think for me, the most positive thing for me about leadership is that it's never about one person. So my experience in the roles that I've taken on and the work that I've done for the last 3 decades is that leadership is never about a single person. It's always about a team of people, invisible or very obvious. And I think that's the most positive part about leadership, is to be working on something that is driving change or driving a different direction, and knowing that it's never ever just me. And so I'll give you an example from a long, long time ago. So years ago, my final year at school, I was the conductor of the 12-voice choir at my school. So I used to sing a lot, and it gave me great pleasure. And at the school valedictory night, I had to stand up and conduct the choir in front of this huge number of people. And I was facing the audience. No, the singers were facing the audience, and I had my back to them as the conductor. And I can remember looking at their faces and seeing terror, excitement, nervousness, fulfillment, all sorts of things on their faces. And it was that moment that I realised that this was only going to be good because there were 12 voices singing this beautiful madrigal piece that we were singing. But it was that, that learning that this, no matter how good I sang, it was never going to be as beautiful as when the 12 voices sang. And that's how I feel. That's how I feel my life is, that leadership is about the great things that I do, and the small things that I do is always because I'm doing it with other people. And that's fun, and watching them grow and all of that sort of stuff is just so magical. It's brilliant.
Okay. Again, let's keep on the positive here. How do you measure success? So, and this one, before you answer, some of the things that have been thrown up as well is this question just around KPIs? And no, it's not. So if you leave the monetary or the monetary success factors in terms of what does success look like? So what beyond that? What do you see as a measure of success for you as a leader?
So the measure for me about success in the things that I've taken a leadership role in is always about the why. So why, if I get to the end of something or get to a point where the change has happened and I can still see really clearly why I did this, then that's success for me. So an example of that is that I worked on an election campaign recently, and the why for that was to assist a terrific young woman get as far as she could in the Victorian state election. And why did I want that? Because I wanted a young person's voice to be heard. And at the end, she nearly got there, but the why was still there. That the whole way through that campaign, it was about having a young person's voice being heard. And that for me was just a huge success, to have spent, time and effort and ensuring that there was a megaphone around so that young person's voice could be heard was really powerful. So that for me is success, is to know, why am I doing something? What is motivating me to do it? What is the why about this? And then getting to the end of it and going, yep, that's why I did it. Look at that.
Yeah, brilliant. Look, I've got a couple of statements for you here, Jill, and I'm not dreading, but I know we might go with some of these, so I'll put the first one to you. On-the-job experience develops better leaders.
Say that again.
On-the-job experience develops better leaders.
I'm going to put a proviso in.
Okay, yep.
Yeah, I agree with that statement. I don't know whether it makes you better, but if on-the-job experience allows you to reflect on what you've just been through, then I think that makes great leaders. If on-the-job experience is simply just taking one step in front of the other, then I'm not so sure about that. Yeah.
Okay, so this next statement might change the caveat.
Yeah.
Formal education helps to develop better leaders.
No.
Okay. Okay.
No. I just can't go with the formal education. I think there are things that can be learnt around leadership. I think there are some skills that people can acquire, but I don't think formal education is the only way you can do it.
Okay. Yep.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's something in there, Eric, about that ability to have an opportunity to gain insight that education can give you, but formal education can give you, but sometimes it doesn't at all.
Sure. Look, so I'll put this scenario to you, and this is one that I've had the chance to live a little bit in that. I came late to postgraduate studies, so I did like you did. I went straight from high school to uni, did a couple of bits of paper, got out, and all I think the studies helped me to do was get my foot in the door. And as once you got into the job, that you started learning about team relationships, power dynamics in your workplace, all those things that no amount of study can ever teach you. But and hear me out on this one. With postgraduate studies, when you're studying with other adults, like in an MBA or like in a master's program of some kind, or even a PhD level study of whatever kind, when you're with people that have come back from the world of work to study, I think that the dynamic there is you get the best of both worlds. So you get the experience of doing the degree, but you're around people in similar situations to you, or at least in the world of work, so that you bring the knowledge that you take from the dynamic of the work environment into your study environment. And that's very different when you've come up from high school straight into uni, because I had my moments when I was a young guy and I was a bit of a shit of a kid to my parents. But when I got to uni, I figured that in the course of study that I would learn everything I might need to know about the world of work. And when I took my first job, all that went out the window, because it's not, work is not a place of theories. It's getting some stuff done and getting it done with a purpose. And not that university doesn't have a purpose, but I think too much theory and too much what ifs when you're studying doesn't really prepare you for the gig once you're in the work, if you get my meaning. So my sense of it is a formal education has more value for the toolkit that you might be building once you've had some experience in the world of work. Now, I will be asked the question at some point, well, how many years is that? I don't know, and I don't think that matters. It's getting in different experiences when you're in the workplace matters. And so again, for the listeners, to get the chance to do the programs that Affectus offers, you get that sense of that discrimination between learning some content and actually applying it in the workplace. And that's being able to bridge that gap can be important. And so from my perspective, I think formal education can help you be a better leader, but you don't necessarily need it unless you're trying to build a specific skill set. And that's something I wanted to come to as well, that in the world of fisheries management, where you've seafood industry, which you've had a lot of experience in, if I wanted to jump ship and go and work in the aquaculture space, I would need to re-kit myself with formal studies in that area to get into it and be a better contributor, because it's not the same sector as a subsector that I'm in now, which is wild catching. You need to do some bridging learning to get there, and you couldn't do, as you said, fake your way through it, because you'd be picked up pretty much straight away. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It does. So I think there's a whole heap of stuff in there, and one of the things that I think's important for us to differentiate is that the the skill set you can build for leadership versus that life experience that teaches you how to apply the skill set. Yep. And so I think there is no doubt that, you know, postgrad, undergrad, learning around, you know, some of those key leadership skill sets is useful. It's not essential. It can be useful. It is useful. It's not essential. It's that being able to look at the situation and apply the leadership in the space when it's required that I think is the real skill around leadership.
Yeah, I would agree with that. So this is the bit in the podcast where I get to ask a question around some of the studies that I'm doing, and not necessarily looking for agreement of saying, yes, this is you're right on the money here, because I'm still not finished with the studies I've got, and I've had to limit what I can look at, otherwise I'd never get the piece of work done. But I'm looking at some of the core leader capabilities that future ag leaders will need, and two of them that I'm looking at in some detail are strategic thinking and foresight. Can I ask from your experience what your thoughts are around strategic thinking and foresight as leader capabilities? I'm arguing that they're critical. I'm not asking you to comment on that bit of it, but definitely in your travels, what do you think of those two capability areas for leaders?
Yeah, so the first one is that whole concept of strategic thinking. I think one of the great skills for leaders is to be able to get up and have a look, and then to be able to think, what does all of that mean, what I'm looking at? So I think strategic thinking is really important, but I think the ability to think strategically is connected to an ability to move yourself out of the doing and be able to get your thinking up above the jobs and the tasks and see what's actually going on. Because I think until you can really see what's going on at a much, you know, way up and looking down on what's going on, until you can do that, then some of the strategic thinking is going to be at an operational level, and that's not strategic thinking, that's just operational thinking. So I think strategic thinking is really important. And I think for me, the other concept of being able to futurize, see the future, is very connected to our ability to be open to new ideas. And there is a real skill in the leadership space for people to be able to abandon the black hat, de bono, the conscientious, if you're thinking about the big five. There's a whole heap of labels that conscientious, seeing, you know, how it's not going to work, to be able to get away from that mindset and just be open to what might come. Because if you're looking at the future and your thinking is really operational and very, this can't be done, then you're seeing the future in a very closed scope. And so I think the really important part about future gazing and futurizing is about getting your head into openness and accepting new ideas and new concepts so that you can see really broadly and then be able to narrow it down later into what actually is possible. If we don't go through that thinking, then I think we aren't doing the futurizing properly.
Yeah, thank you for that. And it's one of the things that as I've asked this question, as I've gone through the podcast, it's almost like there's a degree of overlap between strategic thinking and foresight, because if you're taking, you know, if you're getting up and having a look and seeing what the future might hold or what the roadmap looks like, that necessarily brings in that and we've all got this capability. So strategic thinking and foresight are cognitive abilities that all people have,
Yep.
It's just to what degree do you use them and in what
Mm-hmm.
context do you use them. So I see more and more that there's probably a degree of overlap between the two, because they both will not sit in silos. A particular way people work, you've got things constantly changing in your environment. So if you add the variables of work that might come in, I think it adds to the richness of what could be, versus what your current experience is now. So now that makes a lot of sense to me, Jill. So can I, as the final question here, and this one's around a bit of hindcasting, is what might you say to a younger version of yourself about being an effective leader, Jill?
Vulnerability is okay. Risk is good. Make sure you turn around and look backwards often and see if people are with you. Yep. Vulnerability is okay. Risk is good. And make sure to turn around and make sure people are with you. Because when I was a kid, I had a really different vision of what leadership was. You know, it's standing up, being the loudest, talking the most. I still talk the most, but that whole concept about, you know, it's okay to be who you are, take a risk. Yeah.
And so on that positive note, I'd like to thank Jill for joining me today. Thank you, Jill.
No worries, Eric. Lovely to chat.
And thank you very much, Jill. For those listening, that was Jill Briggs, the founder and managing director of Affectus. She has given her time to come and talk with us. And again, I'm particularly happy to have had her on the podcast, because again, having known her when I first started in this industry 10 years ago, I wouldn't have thought that 10 years on I'd be having a chat over Zoom talking about leadership development. So there you go. Your students come back, mate. You've come back to ask the master a few more questions. And like I said, for those that are interested in the ag and seafood sector to get some very good professional development and leadership development, give Affectus a call, give Jill a call and have a chat. Again, I'll make those details available on the description part of the podcast. So thank you again, and I'll catch everybody on the next podcast.